Thanks a lot, Dr. Afzal Sahab. And it's an opportunity for me to speak on the occasion. I'm very clear about this universal reality that war is never a lasting solution to any problem. Any human history has shown time and time again that war leads to death, catastrophe, and other issues. So instead of turning to weapons, we should engage in dialogues to find solutions. The Russia Ukraine war and its consequences so far have shown the need for peace and justice in society. Mankind has learned the undeniable reality that war and invading another country is never a solution. In any circumstances whatsoever, on the other side, dialogue and discussion have been incredibly effective method in resolving problems in the past. Therefore, all the world powers, especially the United Nations, should unite and work to find a fair and just solution to this conflict and to save humanity from the brink of disaster before it's too late. To contribute to the efforts to end the war, the West should stop lecturing and threat global South as partners. But even they largely focus on how the West can persuade those developing nations to see their own interest differently. The West should understood their interest. There have been no major concessions and no willingness to reconsider the approach of the West to the war in Ukraine, either in the light of its impact and global South. Instead of uniting democracies around the world, the war in Ukraine has divided them. The self centered approach of the West has been harmful to its influences among non Western democracies at a time when it needs them more than ever. In order to end the crisis between Russia and Ukraine, the focus of the world powers should not to be settled personal and deep rooted grudges or an ego contest, but the real focus should always be how to stop war and pave the way for the dialogues leading the peace in the region of the world, in the region and world. The world body also adopted a new resolution calling for an end to the war. The global south has predominantly condemned the Russian invasion in a recent vote on its anniversary in February. 141 out of 193 countries called on Russia to withdraw from Ukraine. Although the 32 countries that abstained made up almost half of the world's population, much to Europe and US fulfillment and frustration. Even the non-Western democracies, Brazil, India, Indonesia, and South Africa, refused to join sanctions on Russia. Moreover, Brazil refused to supply Ukraine with German-made ammunition, while India increased its Russia oil. Therefore, Russia should withdraw all of its military forces from the territory of Ukraine and should ensure cessation of hostilities. One of the issues the United States and its European allies have so far suffered disappointment due to lack of support from the global south. For such of the first year of the war, there was a sense of relief and even about the Western policy unity in response to the Russian invasion. Many in Europe and USA seemed convicted that Russia was isolated. Yes, there is now a growing realization that the globals have not been supportive of the West. Moreover, the Western reckoned with the non-Western democracies that are essential to building a broader coalition. If we want to find common ground with them, we may even need to modify our own approach to the war in Ukraine. Up until the invasion of Ukraine in February 2020, the Western has widely seen so going through a crisis or in a state of decline. In that environment, the unity of NATO's response to the Russian aggression was cheered as a trump. Countless commentators praised Europe and the US for being more united than many had ever imagined. Also, Pope Francis has appealed to end the tragic Ukraine conflict, stating, let us not stop talking. Indeed, us pray to God more intensely. Those who wage war forget humanity. Robert Metsola, the European parliamentarian president, in an interview with Times of Malta, spoke on the palpable fear that Russia's war against Ukraine could spill into neighboring European Union states. Besides resolving the issue, the world should cooperate to address the global impacts of the war on food security, energy, finance, the environment, and nuclear security. All the nations, especially BRICS, including Brazil, Russia, India, China, and South Africa, should cooperate with the world to address these impacts. On 23rd February 2023, the UN General Assembly called for ending the war in Ukraine and demanded Russia's immediate withdrawal from the country in line with the UN Charter. Most regrettably, the war in Ukraine has made the situation extremely grave, and if right decision and timely steps are not taken towards de-escalation and peace building, then it may well escalate further. Undoubtedly, the consequences are and will be horrific and destructive in manner previously not seen by the world. Russia is the world's largest natural gas exporter, the second largest exporter of crude oil, and the third largest producer of crude oil. Prior to the invasion of Ukraine, Europe, China imported 60% and 20% respectively of Russia's oil, and 40% of the European gas consumption was supplied by China. The Russian invasion of Ukraine pushed crude oil prices to historic high and had a similar impact on European gas price. Highly shipping cost, the reputational impact, and buyers' lack of willingness to order from Russian ports that mean Russian oil supply to global markets have been severely disturbed. The European Union has suddenly woken up to danger or over-reliance on hydrocarbon provisions of unreliable partners. Its response to accelerate its transition to renewables. However, the transition cannot be achieved overnight, and so on in the short to medium term. The EU will continue to rely on hydrocarbons for its energy needs. In the medium term, individual European countries are making huge commodity strip hydrocarbons out of their energy system. In January this year, Germany pushed 55% of its gas, 50% of its coal, and 55% of its oil from Russia. By the end of March, those figures had already fallen to 40% gas, 20% coal, and 25% oil. Germany, whose energy minister recently described renewable as freedom energies, has further undertaken to reduce its gas requirement to below 10% of domestic consumption by 2024, and to increase from 40% to 50% its energy provisions from renewable by 2030. That is an ambiguous target, made all the more so by the fact that as industry, transport, and heavily electrified demand for power will also accelerate. Renewable portion provision from 40 to 80% requires a near trebling in installed capacity from 225 TWh in 2021 to over 600 TWh by 2030. Nuclear is making a renaissance. The UK government announced this week in intention to build up the 8 new nuclear stations, and the rise of hydrocarbon as miracle fuel continues. With reference to food, the Russian invasion of Ukraine has already had a noticeable impact on food prices. Between them, Russia and Ukraine export around a quarter of all trader wheat, while more than 3/4 of trader sunflower oil, and 1/6 of the world supply of maize. Russia is one of the largest exporter of these major types of fertilizer, nitrogen, phosphorus, and potassium. Replacing those ingredients will, together with higher gas prices, result in higher input costs, which will in turn impact next season, leading to evaluated food prices in the longer run. In my opinion, migration and governance issues, these economic and social pressures will result in a political response, as the lack of access to and increasing price of food and energy are likely to lead to increased migration from Africa into Europe, with the consequent increase in right-wing populist sentiments. In addition to migration, the global pressure on energy and food prices risk leading to increased inequality and civil unrest, making governance more difficult and contributing to the regional instability. The consequences of that instability range from further disruption to global supply chains to the deployment of peacekeeping forces and the need for significant volumes of aid, all of which themselves have global consequences. In end, these issues, food and energy shortage, supply chain disruption, and migration set against the continuing economic and social impact from
Azhar
a
Siddique
stress
Sahib,
nexus. Stress nexus
Azhar,
potentially. Sir, thank you, sir. I'm sorry.
I'm,
I'm sorry.
I'm very sorry to interrupt, but I've given you 2 extra minutes beyond the 1 minute I added for the loss of connection.
Sir, thank you, sir.
Can we end things here? Thank you very much indeed. This was an excellent, rich in detail talk. I couldn't make enough notes, but I'm sure we'll come back to some of the very good points that have been made.